Welcome to TrineDay's The Journey, conversations with publisher Kris Millegan. I am Bruce DeTorres. With us is Daniel Estulin, award-winning investigative journalist, radio host, and author of The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, the international bestseller about the annual meeting of leaders from Western Europe, Canada, and the United States. His 7 other TrineDay books are Shadow Masters, In the Shadows of a Presidency, TAVISTOCK Institute, Transevolution, Deconstructing WIKILEAKS, The Octopus Deception, and Global Projects at War. And now, Kris Millegan.
Thank you, Bruce, very much for introducing us here. And Daniel, thank you very much for spending some time.
Kris, you're my favorite publisher. I have publishers all over the world. But there's no, well, I'm not saying it because, because you're the guy, that understands this. You're a guy that started this whole journey way back when. And by the way, my Spanish publisher, Planeta, well, as of 2 years ago, they've been invited to Bilderberg. And now they're no longer interested in re-signing Bilderberg to another 5-year contract. Although they've done very well. I guess Bilderbergers have paid them a lot of dough. Like this is like the 6th edition, but it sold like 19 editions. So they've done very, very well, extremely well. One of the best-selling books, non-fiction titles of all time, with Planeta, which is the 3rd biggest publishing company in the world. They do about $2 billion worth of business. They have radio stations, TV stations. But, the book was up for renewal about 6 months ago. And lo and behold, if you believe in conspiracy theories or coincidence theories, they said, well, we're kind of on the fence. So this would have been the 20th anniversary. And I suggested to them, I said, look, there's a lot of things we can rewrite some sections, add new stuff, photos, documents, kind of extrapolate what they've done 20 years ago to what they're planning to do in the future. Oh, they're on the fence. Think about this.
So did they send you a letter?
No, because they still have until September 3rd. But they're not going to publish it. I know we're going to get it published somewhere else or, republished. But still, going back to what I said earlier, you're my favorite, publisher. I love you to death. We've been through a lot of wars together. We've done 8 books. And I actually brought some of them. I have some of them here. There's my Shadow Masters. This is my In the Shadows of the Presidency. This is my Global Projects at War. And just today I gave as a present to a friend of mine this book, as you can see, the Transevolution, the Coming Age of Human Deconstruction.
You like that cover, huh?
It's my all-time favorite cover. There's no one out there who does better covers. No one out there that does better covers than you do. I want to show you the cover of that book in Spain, so you can actually see this horror thing that these people. Here's the cover of of Transevolution. Okay, this is the cover of Transevolution. Okay, the Club of the Immortals, they called it. I said, why? I mean, my American publisher, he said we can use the title. He said we can use the cover. Why are you doing this horrible thing, which makes me look like half robot, half man? Why? When you have a beautiful title, Transevolution, the Coming Age of Human Deconstruction. I mean, we're so dead on, Kris. We're so dead on. In fact, Harari, okay, you know who Harari is?
Yeah, Michael.
Right-hand man to the, Klaus Schwab. He actually talked about this book. I'm being serious in one of the interviews. Somebody said to me, I just heard Harari talking about your book.
Well, good. So I want you to tell the folks about meeting at Four Seasons in Los Angeles.
With whom?
It was the people that owned...
the Terminator people.
The Terminator people, yeah.
Well, we had you and I, we went to LA because when Bilderberg came out, the people who had the rights to the Terminator franchise, Terminator Salvation, I can't remember their names right now. Okay, there was this gay couple, they bought the franchise. They put out Terminator Salvation. They made a lot of money, and they were friends with my ex literary agent Philip Sani from Sweden. And so the guy put us together. We had meetings with them, and they came to see us in Madrid, and then, they were from LA, and needless to say, after they made a lot of money. I think they made like $40-50 million profit. And so they were interested in buying the rights to making a documentary. And, we had lunch with them, and after a little while later, again, if you believe in conspiracy or coincidence theories.
Which book? Which book?
Bilderberg.
Thank you.
Bilderberg. I can't remember who sued them, but somebody sued them. Somebody who was involved in the Terminator franchise sued them for a lot of money. In the end, they lost most of the money. Okay. And the $50 million that they had dwindled to about $2 or $3 million. And so I'm not sure but again, this wasn't our first time that had happened to us. I remind you that there was a Hollywood producer was very interested, somebody you knew. Remember the story that he called and it said that, he got this threatening phone call in the middle of the night?
Yeah, but that was something else. No, on this one, they said they were going to make $126 million blockbuster.
That's right. That's right.
Then, they came to Madrid and announced it, and then it didn't happen.
That's right. I forgot. We had a press conference. Right. The book was like, hot topic, #1 bestseller in Spain at the time, and we had the press conference. Yeah.
Right. So there were some gay guys. Now you were talking, in an email earlier about Gay Pride Month. What do you know about that? What's your thoughts?
Well, that's a kind of a funny thing, because we can talk about the Great Reset. Now, what they call the Great Reset, going back to Klaus Schwab, going back to COVID, basically it's a new course for humanity, according to what? To the liberal financial bankers and globalists. And so, if we eliminate the humanistic claptrap, this gooey emphasis on ecology and saving the planet and helping everybody get better, then the program of this new phase of globalization and the plan of action of the international elite, it doesn't matter if we're talking the Biden administration, just in general, it boils down to the following. They want to create the perfect conditions for a new round of globalization and the implementation of the original program. Now, mind you, again, globalization is on its way out. We saw that with COVID.
I don't think so. Look at the BRICS program. Look at the one road thing that China is doing.
Well, it's a regionalization.
That's globalization.
It's regionalization of global economies. But anyway, okay, so what you have is an alternative multipolar world order based on what? On the rise of independent civilizations. Whether we're talking about the Russians, whether we're talking about the Chinese, whether we're talking about Islam, doesn't matter. And all of them are vying for the place in the sun. And so liberalism, to be relevant, needs an alternative economic model. In other words, an alternative economic language, an alternative model or language that does not exist in this time.
Is liberalism bad?
It's not a question whether it's bad or good, because again, whether we're talking about liberalism, the 19th century Voltaire variety, that's one. What we're seeing today is living at the expense of others. Well, obviously, that's not good. And what we don't have today, what they call liberalism today, okay? Unfortunately, we don't have a theory of post-systemic crisis. We don't have a language. And that's something I explained in this last book, Global Projects as War. We don't have a language to explain what's coming around the bend, okay? So if we look at the main stages in the formation of a liberal ideology, the Great Reset is not something accidental or transitory, Kris. No, globalization is the logical result of what? Of world history, as understood by liberal thought. And liberalism, it's an ideology that prioritizes the liberation of the individual from all forms of collective identity. It began with Protestant Reformation and the abolition of the medieval estates or strata of society. And so as a result, you have this bourgeois society emerged in which everyone was equal, but only in theory and in terms of opportunities. But in the eyes of the liberals, this was great progress. And so whatever was left of the European empires and the power of the Pope, modern nation states arose, again, individuals, and only in the form of states, were freed from collective identity, whether it's Catholic or imperial. But liberal progress, it didn't stop there. And then you had like philosophers like Locke and Kant. So they described the project of this civil society in which nation states were to be abolished. And so in theory, individuals could do without them. And so thus arose the philosophy of cosmopolitanism, which implies the abolition of nation states and ideally the creation of world government. And this was the birth of globalism, albeit in theory. And then we had Adam Smith came along, who formulated the foundations of this liberalism and economics, pointing out the international nature of the market. And so the development of capitalism in this liberal theory assumed the gradual disappearance of the states in general, and in the end, the complete replacement of politics and the economy, that is by the market. And then in the 19th century, Marxism and the critical theory emerged, which literally juxtaposed a liberal individualism and the theory of classes. And so Marxists also agreed on the need for the extinction of the states and what they called internationalism. And then in the 20th century, the ideology of extreme nationalism, in other words, fascism, was born, challenging both liberalism on the one hand and communism on the other. What they did is they put the principle of the nation, state for the Nazis, race for the National Socialists. And then the defeat of fascism in 1945 removed this ideology from the agenda. The image of the future was contested between liberals on the one hand and communists on the other. These are the ones who won World War II. And so this was the ideological meaning of the Cold War that lasted from 1946 to 1989, if you want to take it as the point of reference, the fall of the Berlin Wall. In 1991, if we're talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then in 1991, the liberal West finally won. The USSR collapsed, the communist China embarked on the path of free market economy, albeit with Chinese specificity. And it was then that the end of history by Fukuyama was proclaimed, in other words, the final victory of liberalism, okay, over other types of isms. But if you start analyzing it, it turns out that liberalism or liberals have not quite abolished two types of collective identity: sexual, gender, and also human proper. And this means that liberal progress needed to address what? New obstacles. And that is why gender politics today, Kris, has come to the forefront. Well, today, it actually started back in the 1990s. Its meaning is not just the tolerance towards this perverse radical feminism, restoring gender equality. Sex as gender should become, according to this liberal progressive thought, a matter of individual thought, such as religion, for example, profession, nationality, etc., etc. In other words, or otherwise, progress will slow down. And therefore, this exaggerated emphasis on both transgender people and gay couples in the Biden administration. And so today, democracy has literally come to be defined as the rule of minorities against the majority, which is
I don't find that correct. I find that, a lot of intellectualism around it, okay? Because there is a reality. There is a true reality to fluid genders, and there's a true reality to gay people, okay? I mean, it's been here since the beginning of time, okay? I mean, if you look at the North American Indians, okay, and you look how they dealt with people of fluid genders and whatnot, there is a way to walk around here other than just subscribing to some ism or not.
But it's not really that, Kris, because again, if we like the Great Reset is the last rung of human progress.
The Great Reset is a pipe dream that these people want to do.
But that's as understood by liberal thought.
The world is running out of their control. The world is running away from their control. See, this internet right here, okay, where we're having discussions on, we haven't seen all the changes yet that it has brought about. We've been doing a lot of fighting in this world, excuse my language, around bullshit, okay? Because somebody will say, okay, well, here, and we're going to stand on this and make a thing. But because, I have to go back again to my daddy in the intelligence services, okay, branch chief head of all of East Asia. And he tells me, he says, the Vietnam War is about drugs, okay? There's these secret societies behind it. And then he tells me, and communism's all a sham. These same secret societies are behind it. It's all a big game, okay? And so, they've been gaming a lot of us to fight each other, okay, and saying, okay, this is what you believe in, this is what these people believe in over there. It's antithetical, so why don't you guys fight each other?
So let me see if I can explain it differently. Okay, what you said is totally true, but I don't think it has anything to do with with the gay rights agenda, where it came from, and so on and so forth. Okay, so
the gay rights agenda came from reality. It came from reality. There are people that are going to use it politically one way or the other, but go ahead and explain.
Okay, so the architects of the Great Reset, okay, they're determined to bring their ideological proposal to fruition. In fact, they've been trying to do this. This isn't new. They've been trying to do this for several decades, albeit, without much success. Again, 21st century began with 9/11. Then you had Putin in Munich, 2007. He put himself in the way of these globalists. Then you had the crisis of 2008. Then you had China under Xi Jinping since 2013. Then you have Iran, you have Turkey, then you have Donald Trump. And if the disruptions continue, globalism, because they're running out of time, runs the risk of collapsing completely. And the Great Reset, again, it's now or never. And planetary liberal-oriented elites, both East and West, including, of course, those in Russia, are being mobilized by this globalism to take an active part in this global reset project and overthrow this post-globalist anthropological trend. And this means that both an external and also internal fronts are opening up against the supporters of this multipolarity, against sovereignty, polycentric world order. And so if you add to this, Kris, the start of a series of regime change operations globally, you have this new wave of color revolutions, manipulation of regional religious conflicts. And by the way, the religious axis is a fundamental element as a third part of this. In other words, the calls of Daesh or ISIS terrorists to destroy the churches in Europe is not an isolated act of the fanatical Islamist headcutters, but an element of this global liberalist all-out war against humanity. And so for the postmodern,
well, you want to blame that people for doing it,
I'm not blaming them. I'm just explaining as part of the equation. So, for example, for the postmodern, the fact that human body obeys our brain is a form of dictatorship. As for the postmodern, the goal to move the emphasis centered on the divine spark of reason, dominance from hierarchy to pluralism. And it's obvious that the attack is directed against the gender. So, for example, if in the pre-modern times, gender was sacred, in other words, masculine closer to God, the feminine closer to earth, modern time put masculine and feminine on the same level. In other words, we are equal. And then in the postmodern world,
we are.
But the postmodern affirms that equal rights cannot exist for male and female. In fact, postmodern, they affirm that we have to eliminate gender because the existence of gender is already a pre-modern patriarchal model. In other words, gender has to be like a nation of individual choice, just as human beings have the right to cross the border of different countries. People also have the right to change their sex, and not just once, but many, many times. And from there, the expansion of genders from two masculine and feminine to, what I think, infinity, because they keep inventing these new genders, and everything that seemed unbreakable in the modern structure that resulted from the process of liberation from transcendental verticality. All this in turn in the postmodern world is exposed to a deconstruction and change of meanings. And so if the individual, for example, can represent a parliament of organs, then it is not an individual, but a dividual. In other words, the individual becomes a post-individual agglomerate. In other words, it has to do with the dispersion of personality and the proliferation of nicks on the internet with the liberation of one's own self. And so instead of me, we have this black hole that makes itself known via this nebulosity, this pulverization of the very fragments. In other words, the human being made up of individual parts that together are a parliament of independent elements of a body that do not form a union with each other. And so in this way, what they've done very intelligently, postmodern, from the perspective of sociology and philosophy, represents a kind of a paradigm and is much broader than postmodernists, because postmodernism is a cultural phenomenon that represents certain looming trends of postmodernism. And postmodern, which is not the same as postmodernism, is the logical result that summarizes the entire content of this historical process, at least in Europe. And all those, again, took place gradually because the modern itself, before the 16th century, had its own complex theological, philosophical prerequisites at the time of the European Middle Ages. Okay, and so what have we come to after postmodernism? Answer is nothing, because postmodernism is already nothing. Postmodernist texts, have become irrational idiocy. The value of postmodern world as schizophrenic. So if before reason tried to unite the disjointed elements of human knowledge, today postmodernists offer us the possibility of freeing ourselves from the bonds of knowledge, taking us into the world of this absolute freedom. Freedom from what? From responsibility, freedom from history, freedom from obligations, freedom from knowledge. That's why you can listen to this, idiotic music. You don't need to listen beginning to the end. You can listen at any point, whatever this thing is called. It has the same nothingness to it as if you spend time listening to it from the beginning and the end.
I find all of this just to be a bunch of intellectual Ouroboros, of a snake eating its tail. One thing that we're doing a round table, and we're talking about President Kennedy's speech that he did in '63 about peace, okay? And then we're also looking at a guy by the name of Henry George, okay, who was he was the second most speaker here in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right next to Mark Twain, okay? And he was looking at the question of the commons, okay? Because like in England, it's one thing I'm relating to here. You had the common area, okay, that was owned by everybody, okay? And one thing that we've seen since starting in the 1700s, okay, is the taking away of that commons, okay, by people because they could, okay, and because they've also been dumbing down the population so we don't understand our history. Now, one thing that Henry George is talking about is a land rent thing, because countries and people, families, you have to live within a structure. Okay, you got to pay money and blah 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 blah. But it's not. We don't have a just economy. We don't have a just way of having relations with people, and so that's what we're trying to look towards. Okay, is creating a community that treats everybody the best that they can. I don't know. I see all this other stuff as just talk.
If you look at the postmodernist politics, okay, so democracy stops being a power of the majority and becomes the power of the minority. Why? Because the majority is still related to the moral world that could elect a dictator or an authoritarian character. But if a minority rules, also different minorities, ethnic, religious, sexual, sex, perverts, pedophiles, doesn't matter, then they're going to create a society where there will be nothing concrete or sacred. Everything will be fun, will be virtual, like the gay parades. Happy, everything instantaneous, immediate pleasure, immediate non-fundamental satisfaction, okay, of non-anchored in values. And all this brings us closer to the pre-established objective, celebration of this total nihilism. And this is where we're going to. And that's the objective of these people.
Well, I think a lot of people stand in their way. Okay. And again,
Absolutely.
The dynamics of today are really around the internet. And because, when I started TrineDay, 20 some years ago, I was having to, track down, spooks and military people and talk to them, and they would, they're still trying to figure out what they were doing 20, 30 years ago. Okay. Now I'm getting calls, okay, from military and spook people, okay, because they know what's, because of the internet, it's hard to compartmentalize. Okay. And people have have an idea, and, and we've got a lot of butthurt people out there,
Yep. Yep.
that are creating a lot of noise. Okay, just creating a lot of noise. Okay, and the reality of it is, we all live on one planet.
Yep.
And there's more and more people every day. Okay, and just like Kennedy said, we all breathe the same air. Okay. and we need to learn to get along, okay, rather than trying to get the advantage over somebody else over here and over there and whatnot. And and there's a lot of again just BS that happens. My personal opinion. I'm full of them.
For example, one of the things, again, what we're seeing right now, I think I've talked about this before, I'm not mistaken, but the idea is that how do you create a different, human race that these people can control?
Yeah, I understand these intellectual, exercises, okay, but I'm looking more at the reality of what is happening with people talking to people, and because without all the interjection of all the psychological warfare, I mean the psychological warfare that's been going on for blankety blank generations, okay, has screwed people up quite a bit. One thing that the internet is doing, it is distilling things and creating more honest discussion, okay? Because that's how things change, is people talking to each other and trying to understand, and then trying to go forward into a better future for our children, right? Why else are we here?
It depends if you're looking from the perspective of us, the people, or the psychopaths who run the world.
I'm looking for government of and by and for the people. Bruce, you have any comments or questions?
I think I might be following Daniel, and I totally get where you're coming from, Kris, but I
understand where Daniel's coming from too.
Okay.
I understand where Daniel's coming from.
I'm just explaining how the elite, the reasons why they're doing what they're doing. Going back to this, Transevolution.
I have a point about that, Daniel, that I'm very intrigued. You might dismiss it, or it might open up, more for you. The analysis that says the gender confusion is part of a step toward confusing us about merging with technology. If our genders are fluid and we can merge male, female at will, it's to soften us up to get the implants so that we're happy to merge with our digital realities. What do you think about that?
Of course. That's the Russia 2045 project. Of course, that's your textbook transhumanism. Rooted in what? In many ancient orders, okay, and the philosophy of eugenics. Because at its heart, again, what's transhumanism? It represents this esoteric quest for Godhead among certain, circles of the elite connected to masonry, occultism, science, technology, wherein supposedly evolving superior beings ethically, okay, replace lesser humans, us. And this philosophy, again, is portrayed in the blockbuster film Prometheus. I'm not promoting the film, but the idea in the film, in Prometheus, are, I think, at the core of many ancient civilizations, and the ideas presented in the film are also at the heart of Western secret societies. Because again, across the world, and Kris knows a lot about this, we see early civilizations' obsession with what they believe to be off-world influence. We have Nazca Line, South America, to the pyramids of Egypt. We see artifacts, testaments to early man's obsession to this off-world manipulators. And every ancient culture believed that they were communicating somehow with men from the sky. And one could say that Prometheus movie is simply art imitating life and putting a 21st century spin on the beliefs of the Dogon tribes in Africa. Kris, you've published several books on Hollywood's influence. Hollywood is not an entertainment industry for obvious reasons. And so what makes Prometheus a very powerful film, or a very dangerous film, is the fact that people unquestionably accept the reality presented always. So popular culture, movies, music, they carry messages about how society works, how people should behave. We have subliminal messages will permeate television programs, computer games, magazines, billboards, products, musical productions. And they're just one of the many weapons in the arsenal of this psychopathic corporation whose entire modus operandi concerns what? Profit and dehumanization. Okay, so absolutely, what you said, Bruce, totally agree with you. Okay, but again, that's just the underlying element. There's a lot of other underlying elements. For example, the whole thing of programming robots, that's front and center right now. In other words, robots capable of understanding human language without difficulty. We're seeing with ChatGPT, OpenAI, et cetera, but then I have questions. For example, do robots have to obey human orders? And I suppose if it's your robot, I guess the answer is yes. It's like a dog. And if, the order contradicts the safety and physical well-being of others, more than likely not. Now, how about, for example, if you go away on a business trip and the robot is left with the child, with your son? It's like if it's a dog, obviously the son becomes the owner of the dog. Can a 5-year-old command the robot? That's another question. Again, we realize that we've been there, we've done that before. It was called slavery. And now we're going to have this, whatever you want to call this. And this creates an analogous situation of a very complex division of society and a very complex new family format. And so what are we going to do, or how we're going to move forward as society is absolutely unclear. And I think it's the point of being born into this man-machine society where the very essence of human being is being destroyed right now. And I'm not talking about cyborgs. I'm talking about a situation where a human being, with a computer will have to deal with a basic division of labor. No human being, for obvious reasons, can surpass the ability of AI with big data. But today, artificial intelligence cannot surpass our ability of deep data. That's still, a while away. But again, what we're seeing is the birth of robots that already passed not only the Turing test, in other words, the examination of machines' ability to exhibit intelligent behavior similar to that of a human being or indistinguishable, or to say in an easier to understand way, we cannot distinguish from the machine's dialogue whether we're talking to a robot or a human being. But then there's LEM test. That's a lot worse. And LEM's test is to ask the robot to create something new and different that is not programmed into its artificial intelligence and cannot be the consequence of a combination of previously known events. Because LEM test is the test of creation, a divine spark of reason, which we have always considered to be a purely human ability. Now, when the robots pass this, and we're seeing the first signs of that, we arrive at a man-machine society. I didn't say co-society of human beings and robots, because that doesn't exist. Power is indivisible. And so we are going to have to fight for our own survival, just as the Neanderthals had to fight against Homo sapiens. We're going to have to fight against this other thing, whatever it is that we are.
I want to ask Kris right here, Kris, your thoughts about the apparent or the implied inevitability of what Daniel's describing.
We've always had a relationship with technology. Where I'm thinking more, you've got dogs running, these robot dogs running around with machine guns is more what I'm thinking of. Oh, okay. And I mean, and who's gonna control them dogs?
Well, that's the whole thing. So we have to realize that from this point onward, we have crossed the evolutionary threshold of being human as a species, and everything from this point on requires an absolutely new approach from the very definition of what it means to be new, its rights, relationships within society. And so the evolution of the logic of evolution, that the way we understand it, has come to an end from this point on. And this whole thing about the Hammurabi laws, which is basically an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, which has been around for the last 3,800 years, that's going to have to be rewritten. Because it's coming into
it's been trying to be written for a long time. I mean, we do this book called Bridge of the Gods. Okay, it's basically the first novel written in Oregon. Okay, and it's basically about a guy goes from Boston out to Oregon, and because he wants to talk to the Indians about stop the blood feuds. I mean, that's been a tenet of religiosity for quite a while. Right now here in the United States, okay, we've got an election going on, and we've got one side, continues to denigrate other human beings, calls them vermin, okay, and stuff like that. That's dehumanizing. I still am a good believer in people, and I think that, again, with the internet, okay, doing some education, I really see change happening in a good way. We have it on paper here with our Constitution the ability to control our own destiny.
What percentage of humanity do you think is oblivious to changes taking place around them?
First off, you have some people that are they're just scratching so hard just to stay alive, okay? And then you have a lot of people that are distracted, okay? But the American Revolution wasn't done with, 30% of the population.
3%, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, So, I mean, it doesn't take a percentage of the population to make change.
I think you're going to need a lot more than 3% to make a change this time around.
Yeah, well, and I think it will happen. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, what else are you going to do? What's your solution?
I don't know. I think, again, the idea of what we're seeing right now is a birth of a new world. Like literally a new world is being born as we speak.
Yeah.
What's it look like, we don't know, because the problem today is that for the first time in history, if you take history like over the last 2,000 year period, because what we're seeing today has only happened twice in 2,000 years. The first time between the 4th and the 6th centuries when the Roman Empire collapsed. The second time, when feudalism collapsed 1,000 years later, between the 16th and the 17th centuries, you had, the capitalist model born. And that model, okay, whether we're talking about, as a point of reference, the discovery of America, or 1694, the creation of the Bank of England, we're talking like, that capitalism today is on its deathbed, which was based on infinite expansion. And for the first time in these last 2,000 years, we have no model that can replace either one of these models which were there before.
Again, isms are intellectual constructs. They aren't reality.
Whatever you want to call it. We have no model to define what the world is going to look like economically. Where are we going now that this collapse is officially in motion? What's it going to look like? What's this new world going to look like economically? It's a very simple question. There's no isms there. The capitalism, the way it was created, is on its deathbed. You cannot expand any more on the planet Earth. You can go down or you can go up. Okay, so what's this new thing going to look like? What does it look like around the corner? Nobody has an answer to that. The Americans don't have an answer. Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese have a model for the Chinese. It's only for the Chinese. And the One Belt, One Road that you mentioned earlier, it's the same thing. It's a copy and paste of what the United States does, except that the Americans are dumber because they use the barrel of a gun. The Chinese are smarter, been around for a lot longer. Okay, it's still territorial expansion, towards towards the exterior.
Well,
that's what
I find some prejudice there in your analysis. I do. I find prejudice there in your analysis. Okay, because I mean, Americans didn't just use a gun. And people all around the world are very creative, and I think that there's going to be some amazing things that come. Like I say, one thing that we're looking here is a thing called Henry George's economics. Okay, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, was one of the worst towns in this country. Okay, all boarded up and all kinds of things. Okay, they changed how they were dealing with land valuation. Okay, and it brought it back up, and so the human being is very resilient and very creative, and I think that we're going to come up with something, and because you've got so many people out there, especially with all these isms, okay, trying to put their ism on other people and all this type of stuff. With the internet and all this, we're losing the hierarchical control. Change is happening. Yeah, we're at a paradigm shift here, most assuredly.
Couple of questions for both of you. Kris, how certain are you that humanity will retain its nature and overcome all that is sucking us into a transhuman man-machine future?
People are going to resist it, and not everybody's going to want to become a half robot type thing. Okay, and I mean
Okay.
it's just not going to happen.
All right, Daniel. what are the odds that humanity will be lost in the transhuman agenda, the transevolution transhuman agenda?
I don't believe that.
You don't believe humanity is going to succumb to the transhumanist agenda of the Great Resetters?
No, because evil can never win in the end. If you believe in God, evil can never win. And so I think Russia today has a chance to show not only Europe, but the entire world a new path, the path of enlightened traditionalism, the essence of which is not the dominance of one nation or race over others, but the primacy of national interests over the interests of the European Union, NATO alliance, the United States, and others. So in other words, a return to traditional identities. And that's what Alexander Dugin was saying in his interview with Tucker Carlson. I'm not sure if you guys saw that in English. Okay? Of course, such a Europe will not love Russia, but we don't need to be loved. Russia does not need to be loved. We're not asking for that. The objective is to come to an agreement on mutual and national interests, as for example is with Hungary. And this will become, I think, a cornerstone of a new multipolar world. And that's something that they need to try to prevent at all cost.
Well, ain't life more fun than anybody ever thought? So what's your next book, Daniel?
Well, that's a good question. I actually have an offer in Spain to work on my Transevolution #2 on transhumanism, with so much stuff that's happening right now, how it's linked to the new economic models, what's in store for us, and as humanity in the future. Anyway, so I think I'll start working on that in September.
Well, I keep working on, and it is happening, the legalization of drugs, okay, because that's the cash cow, okay, that moves the shadows, okay, and gives them any semblance of control. The march of history goes a little bit that way and then this way and comes back and all kinds of things.
It's funny you should say that, Kris, because again, as you know, I've worked a lot. I'm foreign policy advisor to 6 presidents in Latin America. Some of these presidents are in prison, such as the case of Pedro Castillo in Peru. But anyway, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. The base, I guess, the skeleton of the future meta-states, we're not even talking countries anymore, but meta-states, are the cartels, or rather they're the most visible part of this meta-state. And so over the past 20 years, since 9/11, there's been this significant integration and restructuring of this global criminal industry. And Latin America
absolutely
has become a king.
Yeah. Because see, the secret societal level has broken down some, and their ability to dig down in and control things. And so your next level is sovereign countries, but then you have these criminal gangs in between there. Okay, I mean, drugs. Besides, you've got the importation and that, okay, that creates some jobs and whatnot. But then when you go to the money laundering, that's a huge, big industry, and creates a lot of corruption. Okay. So, I mean, basically what's keeping us people away from, honest government, okay, is corruption. Wouldn't you say that's quite?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if you think of the drug trade itself, we talked about this in this book, which I think was, an amazing book, Shadow Masters, how the governments and their intelligence agencies are working with international drug dealers and terrorists for mutual benefit and profit. We talked about, the amount alone in drug trade globally. That was like when the book came out 10 years ago. That was like $950 billion in illegal and unaccounted funds. And the initially, beautiful plan to strengthen this global leadership by creating controlled structures, by which, you have this, charismatic Colombian cartels that were defeated in the late 1990s. Well, it failed. And why did it fail? Because the destruction of the global world system was not taken into account. And so the group of cartels is increasingly outside the control of the intelligence agencies, reinforcing its independent policies every year, globally, whether it's Mexico, whether it's Colombia, whether it's, Ecuador, Brazil. Now you have African countries, and the Chinese, needless to say, they're helping along. And so the day's not far away, I think, when the situation with the Islamist movements will be repeated, but there will no longer this able bodies to fight them. In other words, you have this, different groups of terrorist organizations the world over. You're gonna have the same thing. And one of the things I really liked in that film, Sicario, okay, Benicio del Toro, it was an amazing film because they tell you right there in the film, the first part, not the second, that the idea is that as long as 20% of people, snort that shit up their nose, you're gonna have drugs. And the thing is that before, in the old days, Medellin was an example of a one-stop shop, and then it disintegrated in the 1990s, and now you have this, kind of a Islamic movement, 2.0, where it's very difficult to control. And what they're doing is they're trying to, again, to rebuild this kind of a Medellin in a new structure. And so in recent years, the cartels, and that's why the Mexican cartels are so powerful. And so the Mexican cartels are becoming new Medellin. Okay, the Pablo Escobar, that's the Mexican cartels right now. And so the cartels have captured not only international money flows, but also local flows in the United States, in Europe, and Asia, defeating or conquering other groups and competitors.
Right, and capturing governments even,
And capturing governments because
and then you have a criminal gang here, criminal gang here, criminal gang there in other countries. Okay, and then they start working together and disabusing their governments. Okay, and so you have a different kind of a power structure out there that's basically built on violence.
The governments cannot, the central governments in Latin America,
right,
just so that we are very clear, cannot under any, they have zero chance, like 0.00 of coming out victorious. Why? There are several reasons. Again, I live in this part of the world. I speak the language fluently. I know a lot of these people. I work with governments, with intelligence agencies. Number one, there is no power resource. There's no special forces, no enough intelligence agencies, internal troops, army for the physical destruction of organized crime, which is much more powerful than they are. Number two, the population in Latin America is very integrated into the criminal economy. Okay, there are very few at best employment alternatives other than that. Number three, weakness, lack of self-sufficiency, raw material nature, high specialization of the economy. Number four, the ability of cartels to organize terror, blockade the flow and sabotage of the entire public sphere. You have distrust and ignorance of the institutions and personalities of the state that has developed over many generations. You have transnational structures of cartels that are capable of withdrawing, from one area that's becoming too hot, regrouping and then returning with much larger force. They're much more adaptable right now. They control the internet, they control the cybercrime. It's also a unique cultural, semantic and linguistic space, Kris. The absence of the image of an external enemy against which one can unite a nation and introduce a state of emergency. And finally, lack of political will because of corruption, vendetta, elites, and the entire structure is based on crime. Everybody, from the president to the judiciary to the legislative branch to the executive branch, they're all in on it. Right. It's not that they all make money, directly, but if you eliminate the drugs from the economy, the entire system in Latin America collapses onto itself because everybody, from the top all the way to the bottom, is one way or another plugged into the system and making money. So victory of the cartels in a single country requires what? Breaking the chains of criminal production, building an economy with alternative incomes, which is very difficult because there's no other source of income, destruction of the expulsion of criminals and their sympathizers. And that's why what we're seeing right now in El Salvador with Bukele. I mean, it works in El Salvador. It's a test case. It's not that Bukele is a revolution. It's a test case. But you cannot do in Mexico, which is a country of 135 million people, what you were able to do in a tiny little El Salvador. Right. Okay, you can put these people in prison, but you cannot do that in a country with 135 million people, which is the 8th biggest economy in the world. You just can't do that. And unfortunately, there are no external forces capable of helping Latin American governments. And so when you have an American senator or congressman, I can't remember which one of these idiots there, that actually said, we're going to invade Mexico. It's like, what? It's a 135 million person country that the entire country will unite against you. They'll kick your ass back to the United States. Are you out of your mind? Okay, they don't understand. You can't just invade a country like Mexico unless you're going to wipe up the entire country. That's a different story.
Right. Well, again, like I say, what I continue to work for is the legalization of drugs. Okay, because without the cash cow, they drop away. They do. They drop away because I mean, the money produced is off the charts.
I can tell you what they're saying, like, American think tanks, what they're saying. There was a report, I can't remember, a few months ago, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, a RAND corporation that basically said that in the next 10 to 15 years, nation states in Latin America will be further weakened and cartels will be strengthened at the expense of the nation state. And most of them under the influence of what? Of the intelligence structures. Criminal management, it doesn't matter what it is. Okay, will transmogrify into structures, into clans, into communities, semi-legal, multi-branch. And that's what a meta-state is. So if you have the destruction of nation states, regionalization of global economies under the auspices of the control of this meta-criminal structures, I have no idea what they will do. And I think existing states may even remain, resembling the German kingdoms of the late 19th and early 20th centuries that existed as part of the Second Reich, gradually dissolving and losing their uniqueness. And I think the relatively strong countries, like in Latin America, such as Brazil, for example, will be able to survive over the next 10 to 15 years. But the weak, medium-sized, like, Uruguay, Argentina, Ecuador, Venezuela, they will go through the horrors of this criminal chaos, which is the past of every country on the continent. And that's what Rand is saying. And unfortunately, I think they're true. They're right. I have no idea, other than the all-out war, how to actually get rid of this.
Well, I mean, in Haiti right now, we've got basically criminal gangs, running the streets.
Yeah.
And it's not quite as bad in some of the other countries, but there are places where it is.
One quick question. Which of your books might be most memoir? And if none is really memoir, have you ever thought about writing one?
None of them are. Well, my dad wants me to write one. Unfortunately, the things that if I told some of the things that I know, I'd probably be killed immediately. Okay? Because again, remember, I started my career in the military counterintelligence in Africa. So like, people call me specialist on Bilderberg or an expert. I hate that. I'm not an expert on Bilderberg. I wrote Bilderberg because I needed to eat. Okay, and so I thought when I was coming out of the military counterintelligence, but I'm a specialist on Africa. I used to speak quite a few local dialects, but that's my area of expertise. I started my operations in Congo, in Sudan, in Darfur, in northern Uganda, etc., etc. That was my area, and our job back in the 1990s was to eliminate the local mafias, which were, mining blood diamonds and then sending these blood diamonds or selling them to all the criminal organizations who were using the money to blow up apartment buildings in Russia and kill lots of people in the reign of terror back in the early 1990s. Okay, so our job was to eliminate these people. And there's only one way to do this. And anyway, there's a lot of harrowing stuff that we had to do. Okay, and some of the other stuff that we saw, because our base of operation was in Mujimai, which is like literally just happened to have been like a mile away from where the United Nations had their central compound. And we could see on a daily basis how, private jets were coming in and taking, black kids, Americans, Europeans, Israelis, et cetera, organ harvesting, pedophilia, rituals, et cetera, horrible stuff. But we were told to stand down. We couldn't do anything because it was the United Nations compound. Okay, and so we had to do a lot of nasty stuff there. Okay, and I can't really go into it on the air. But how did I meet Victor Mood? I met Victor Mood because once my government, the Yeltsin government, realized the kinds of things we had to do, well, they thought it was probably the best thing to do was to kill us. And the only way to kill, because again, like for example, Sudan. You look at the map of Africa. Well, Sudan is bigger than all of Western Europe. Understand that, Bruce. Sudan as a country is bigger than the entire Western Europe. And every time we would be like in one place, like these terrorists would find us, and we could never figure out how the hell did you find you if you were in Madrid and the other guy's in Berlin. Until we realized it was my government was trying to kill us. And they were able to kill a lot of us, not all of us. Okay, some of us just didn't want to die. And so, we'd call for help, and Victor Boot, whom I didn't know at the time, it's like in these Hollywood films, would just appear out of nowhere and save our ass over and over and over again. And then when Victor was arrested in Thailand, I got a call from a friend of mine, a Russian nuclear expert. He said they arrested Victor. You know, it took me like no time to get my family together and went to Thailand to save his ass. And I financed the entire, you know, that was expensive. Okay, but my life was worth a lot more. So basically, I almost went broke trying to save Victor Bout against the Russian and the American governments who were working together against Victor Bout. Okay, and so anyway, if I actually did write a book, I'd probably get killed by my own government the same day. And so we'll leave it at that for now. And I started following Bilderberg in the 1990s because in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, Bilderberg was important. It was never, you know, the top of any pyramid. Like, you know, people, when Bilderberg came out, people said, aha, so these are the people who control the world. This was not the case. Okay, so, but Bilderberg is a private organization, but common denominator, aha, so these are the people who run the world. You know, suddenly they had a face, a name, pictures, documents, you know, faxes, all kinds of stuff. But it's not the case. Okay, but they were important as a kind of a mid-level thing between those who make real decisions and those who, you know, take orders. And then, you know, it became, after the book came out, it became popular, and so other people started following. You know, I went to these Bilderberg meetings, took pictures. Here I am, you know, right in front of the Bilderberg Hotel. Boom! Boom!
You stopped the French Canada.
Yes. We had, you know, and in Canada was 2000.
And got Conrad Black fired.
That's very true, Kris. That's very true. Yeah.
Well, we got to think of our listeners here. We've been on long enough.
Okay, guys. Well, listen, thanks so much.
You bet. Thank you very much, Daniel. You have a good day. Say hi to your kids.
I will do that. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
God bless. Take care.
Bye-bye.